Hi there, welcome to a strange evening edition of IndyCar. Not often that I do these, but unfortunately the last few days I've been working flat out, haven't had the time to put any kind of programs together, so I thought maybe a brief IndyCar this evening might give you something different to watch instead of Coronation Street. So here we are. And I wanted to talk this evening not about the news particularly, although there will be a news item later on in this bulletin, but actually primarily about how the general election this year and the upcoming Holyrood election in 2026 might play a role in allowing ourselves or giving ourselves a process by which we can gain independence. Now, I'll explain a little bit more about how this works in a moment, but if we split this into, first of all, two different elections, this general election this year cannot on its own result in us becoming independent. But there is a something that we can use to our advantage here. Back in the 1970s, in fact, and even later on, I think in the 80s, Margaret Thatcher was widely quoted as saying that if Scottish nationalists, as they call this in those days, wanted Scottish independence, we simply had to get a majority of nationalist MPs elected to Westminster. Now, that has happened on several occasions, at least 3 occasions that I know of, probably might even be longer than that. We have always produced pro-independence majority seat counts. Majority seat counts at Westminster. Now, these are what we would call the first past the post general election results, where the party with the largest number of votes wins the seat. It doesn't need to be a majority of votes to do it. That's the way the Westminster system works, which is why the Tories get in when sometimes they've only got about 34% of the popular vote. However, what I propose doing is using this first general election this year to achieve what's commonly known as the Thatcher Doctrine, which is to get a majority of pro-independence MPs elected to Westminster. Now, as far as I understand it, after the gerrymandering of the various constituencies in Scotland, we are losing 2 MP seats in this new rearrangement of boundaries. So there will be 57 seats to be contested by Scottish candidates. Now, if the SNP manages to win more than 50% of those seats, that is a seat majority. That fulfills the Thatcher Doctrine of providing essentially the proof that's needed to gain independence. Now, I'm not predicting that in any way that the Thatcher Doctrine will be honoured by the Tories. We know that they never live up to their promises and they constantly lie. A little bit like the Labour Party in that respect. However, it does fulfil that first doctrine, and that would be step 1 in this plan. So we store this up for later on. We basically document that. We make sure that that is recorded historically for posterity, that we have achieved yet another seat majority, fulfilling the requirements of this so-called Thatcher Doctrine to gain independence. Now, the second part of the plan that I envisage is to use the following general election at Holyrood for a similar purpose, but this time not to gain a seat majority, but to gain a vote majority. And it's this vote majority which, in terms of pure democracy, is the hurdle that we have to leap. This is the target we have to aim for. More than 50% of the votes going to pro-independence parties. Now, notice I'm not saying the SNP here, because it won't matter whether you vote for the SNP, the Greens or Alba in the Holyrood elections, so long as you vote for a party which has independence as part of its manifesto. In doing that, if the number of votes cast, and I'm aggregating both the first and the second votes, so in the first past the post votes, if we get a majority there, we count up the number of votes that have been cast for pro-independence parties, all of them, and we add them together. When the second votes are counted, normally there is a calculation applied to those, which basically divides the most popular vote by 11. So it reduces, or it would have reduced normally the SNP's second vote. However, I don't propose worrying about the D'Hondt system. What I do want to do is to count the numbers of voters who vote for pro-independence parties in the second vote as well. we tally that up, add it to the initial total that we got from the first past the post seats, and that becomes the final total for pro-independence parties. We then aggregate all of the votes for the pro-union parties, both in the first and the second votes. If the pro-independence parties have a majority of 50% plus one vote even, that is a clear mandate to end the union. It's democratically arrived at. The majority of people have voted for it, and we also have fulfilled the requirements of the so-called Thatcher Doctrine in the previous general election. So that is enough proof, more than enough proof, for anybody to say that Scotland has voted for its independence. The problem then arises, how do the politicians that we have currently elected and Holyrood ministers actually manage to achieve that independence in any meaningful way? And I think the answer to that is they cannot do that, for a number of reasons. The first one is that the Holyrood Parliament, in order to become elected to it, you have to swear an oath, not to Scottish voters, not to the sovereign Scots who are voting for you, but to Westminster. You have to swear an oath to King and Country, or to King and the UK, I should say, before you may take your seat as an elected MSP. Now, that would make it treasonous for any MSP of any party to declare independence or take action leading to the breaking up of the United Kingdom. So I don't believe that any of the political parties will have the bottle to basically defy the rules of Westminster and actually start making independence happen. And I don't see how it could happen anyway, because there is no mechanism for doing so. The only accepted mechanism which the SNP accepts is the lawful, in inverted commas, referendum as stipulated by the British Supreme Court. Now, that is never going to happen, and the SNP is not going to be able to deliver independence based on the two vote counts that I've already mentioned. However, that gives us all the ammunition we need to take the case for independence to a higher authority, namely the International Court of Justice. Now, the International Court of Justice deals with international law, and it largely ignores the laws of the dominant country in the case of what they would term as decolonisation. Scotland, I think, can prove now, without a shadow of a doubt, that it is a colony of the English state, simply because the English state has made sure there are no routes to democratic events which would allow the Scots to decide whether the Union should continue or not. That means there's a denial of democracy. And the denial of democracy to the smaller nation is, in effect, stating that that basic country that has been taken over is a colony of England. England being England as Britain. You know, how they say that English people are British. Well, that is what it's about. And Scotland, being a colony, is then entitled to go through the decolonisation process with the United Nations and to sign on to the programme. Now, it may take years to do that, but in the meantime, the case for Scottish independence can be ruled upon by an international court which does not have any flesh in the game. It has no interest in whether Scotland leaves the Union or not. And that is what you want, because plainly there is no way for us lawfully or legally within the framework of the United Kingdom's legislative framework for us to do that, because every door has been firmly shut in our faces. There is no way for us to get any kind of meaningful democracy. So the proposal I have is to win both of these elections. First of all, winning by a seat count at Westminster, getting a seat majority first, and in 2026 gaining a full vote majority. And it's going to take a massive Herculean undertaking on the part of every independence activist and all independence parties, because we would need to mobilise our support like we haven't done since 2014. We're looking for a turnout of over 90% to make this happen, because I can guarantee you that the supporters of the unionist parties will be doing exactly the same thing in rallying their troops to try to prevent us from succeeding. Forgive me while I switch the lights back on. My battery's running out here. Anyway, so that is the plan. The only other piece of news I have for you this evening, which I found absolutely shocking when I saw it posted on X this evening, is that the much vaunted and anticipated new ferry route, which was planned to take freight and passengers from Scotland across the North Sea, has abruptly been axed. And the reason, apparently, according to the news releases I've seen so far, is due to, and I quote, a lack of government support. Now, the report I read does not specify which government has not given its support to this, but I think it's safe to say that it would be the Scottish Government, because this is mainly a Scottish effort. And for the consortium which put this deal together, and all the way up until last week, they were trumpeting this as about to happen, and suddenly somebody has pulled the rug out from under it. And the only people who could do that, the only people who could cut off that government support, I guess, would have to be the SNP government itself. So the question now is, and we may find this out tomorrow, who was it who decided not to support this? And if they did that, why did they decide not to support it? Now, I can hear you already saying it's because Scotland doesn't have enough money to support such a venture. I would disagree with that. The Scottish budget, although it always has to be balanced and we have to keep within our means, nearly always produces a surplus, some unspent money at the end of the year, at the end of the financial year in April, which can be used for other purposes. Normally, that would be given to local authorities who would spend it furiously on all sorts of things they haven't been able to do throughout the year, like fixing potholes, for example. But in this case, I suspect it could have been diverted towards this particular ferry proposal. However, that seems to have been absolutely nixed by whoever this was. Either way, it's not a good look for the SNP, who have been trumpeting the fact that they've been strengthening Scotland's trading with Europe, and Scottish exporting would be boosted by this, tourism would be boosted by it, and so forth. So it is a bit of a shocker to find out that the whole thing has basically been pulled at the last minute. So I'm sad about that, but I'm optimistic for the next two general elections. So the idea of this two-pronged attack is to achieve both the Thatcher Doctrine target of a seat majority at Westminster, first of all, which according to the Thatcher Doctrine means we would become independent. Failing that, which we know we can virtually guarantee that the English state is not going to wear that one, we go on to win a vote majority in our next general election at Holyrood. Now that would prove that a majority of Scots have voted for independence, and it's not a referendum. It can't be denied by the United Kingdom. An election has to take place in 2026, and this would be the prime opportunity to demonstrate that the people themselves want independence, never mind whether the parties are going to provide it or not. It would then be up to organisations like Liberation Scotland and Salvo to put together the legal arguments for Scotland to become independent and to get decolonisation status at the UN. It's a lengthy process, but as far as I can see, it's the only way of getting independence to actually happen when your own politicians have basically been got at by the United Kingdom. Now, when I say got at, I mean they're frightened to actually take this kind of action. I'm willing to bet you that some kind of subtle veiled threats have been issued by some spooks from the United Kingdom at some meeting somewhere. We do know that some senior figures of the SNP attended a British organised charity which called itself the Institute for Governance, I think it was called. The Institute for Statehood and Governance. And this was a charitable organisation, a trust, which was meant to educate people from other countries about international diplomacy and international relations and how to view other countries such as Russia and so on and so forth. Now, we do know, because it's recorded, that Nicola Sturgeon and many of her close associates actually attended this organisation in 2018, I believe, and went on an expenses-paid trip funded by the British government and this institute, which is also funded by the British government, to, of all places, Ukraine. And actually they visited Inde-Car, which is, of course, the centre of one of the major battles that's going on at the moment in Ukraine. And I'd be willing to bet you this was the UK government educating our Scottish ministers on how they should behave in terms of international relations. And I'll bet you that there were some subtle hints dropped about how the Union is a part of those international relations and how they must behave if they want to remain in office. So having said all of that, there is evidence to be seen that the SNP's senior figures did attend this. I believe Nicola Sturgeon was at this event and went on this trip, alongside some other senior figures. I think Stephen Gethins was one. And I'm trying to remember who else. There were one or two other senior figures from the SNP who went on this trip at the behest of this organisation run by the United Kingdom. So, although I think, having read articles about this piece of history from 2018, it's implied that there must have been some pressure put on the SNP's ministers in this setting. And on this trip perhaps as well, because it was mounted by diplomats and former diplomats of the United Kingdom, and it involved primarily the top figures in the SNP visiting a foreign country and being, paid for the whole trip, all expenses paid by the United Kingdom. So I'm willing to bet you that the actual price of that little trip to Ukraine in 2018 was not in terms of money value, it's in terms of promises or pledges or assurances from those politicians that they wouldn't take steps to break up the United Kingdom. This is, as I say, not fact, and I'm making this clear right now. This is supposition on my part and on the part of some other commentators who have revealed these facts recently. So the situation is difficult, but it's not impossible. And if our politicians are unable to act after we win what is required from both the first general election this year and our own general election in 2026 to prove that we have a majority for independence, if they cannot action that because of threats from the UK, even if they are subtle, then I think it's up to the people to mount a challenge, a legal challenge internationally, through organisations like Salvo and Liberation Scotland. And I'm sure there will be other political pressure groups and international legal representatives who want to go on this delegation. But when that happens, the United Nations will finally see the full truth of the situation in the UK. And perhaps then they'll understand why Scotland has voted for independence in two different elections, in two different ways, satisfying both the Thatcher Doctrine and the full majority vote count in the second general election at Holyrood to prove it. Anyway, those are my thoughts. These are not facts. These are my thoughts at the moment on how this might be done. Let me know in the comments after the programme what you think of these ideas, and if you have any other ideas as well that you want to add to this debate, because this is one of the few times we get a chance to think about this. And with the chaos going on in the world around us at the moment, it's hard to focus our attention on what's really important. And of course that is the reason why so many countries are rattling their sabres and getting themselves on war footings, because as politicians know, when your party is failing in general elections and your poll ratings are falling, there's nothing like a good war, even if it's somebody else's war, to get yourself involved in sort of remotely, to take the focus away from what's actually happening right here and move it to what's happening over there, where we're fighting against some unseen enemy. Either way, Scotland needs to get out of the Union, and we need to refocus ourselves and not be distracted by all the flack that's flying around in the world of global warmongering. Anyway, that's it from this evening edition of IndyCar. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you all for the comments. I am still reading some of them, but I'll be interested to hear what you think of these ideas. Anyway, that's it from me tonight. Keep the faith, have a good evening, and hopefully I'll see you a bit later on in the week. Bye for now.